Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We're on another Hacker Hangouts, and I am so happy we are back after a 2-week hiatus to talk about our home hacking labs. I'm under the weather, so at one point, if I hack up a lung off the left, I will try and mute. But if not, I'm gifting that to you because I know you wanna hear that. This is such a cool topic to me because I feel like my home lab has evolved over time. Gator, every single time I talk with you, you're diving into your home lab, and you just recently got to rewire your whole thing. And Gulo, like always, you're a mystery to me, and I have no idea at any point if you have a home lab, have 30 home labs, or you have one buried under your basement. Other than that, people in chat, thank you for being here. How have you guys been? It's been 2 weeks. It's good to be back.
Good to be back indeed.
I have a cafefe. I have my
Cafefe? Fantastic. Doing okay. Silk did a little bit of traveling for the first time in 2 years for work, which was wild, and then seek shelter in place for a few days afterwards. Make sure all the tests came back clean. Excited to see all the progress forward with DEF CON and B-Sides Las Vegas that's going to be happening. Seeing how they're going to be handling when folks are coming out. But yeah, rebuilding home labs. In a brand new home as well has been interesting because you've got to start somewhere, and then you're like, well, do I have space to do anything right now? And the answer to that is no, but if you don't get it started, you don't have anything running. So you just got to do it.
The other thing I found out about with it was so funny because someone's like, home lab was a project. And I'm like, oh yeah, there was so are we allowed to call it home lab? Was that trademarked or something like that? But apparently that was someone's offshoot software, and I think it worked what's the home alternative to Siri? You use it, don't you, Gator?
Oh, you're talking about Home Assistant, or you're talking about Mycroft, or
Home Assistant? Mycroft is the one I was thinking of. I was wondering if Home Lab was kind of like an offshoot of one of theirs. But when we're talking Home Lab here, I'm talking about whether it's your server rack. I think the coolest place to start is probably obviously our journey, but how we started with building up our lab, where it is now, some of the tricks we learned along the way, and then maybe even some budget options if you're just getting started and just want to build up something small, whether it's on a Raspberry Pi or some of the quick ways to get started. But what do you use your home lab for? What's the purpose of it for you specifically, Gator? And then I want to hear you, Gulo.
So my use case is being able to test something out. When I wanted to become a system administrator first, because my thought process was, if you're a good sysadmin, then you know how to build things, break things, and then introduce developers and users to it. And then that'll actually help you become better at pen testing, because not only do you know how to build it, then you start to learn how to break it, and then you can document and make it better. So for me, always having a home lab gives me the ability to go trial out new pieces of software, new versions of software, and set up different environments to where, since it's mine, I can infinitely change it the way that I want to. So it's a gigantic playground for me.
Yeah, Nathan in chat says, I remember having a huge server rack, a few Dell 7, oh yeah, definitely the R710s, switch routing. Now I just have a few Raspberry Pis, a cloud environment, and a small ESXi server. Yeah, I feel like mine has kind of does this back and forth, because you also have, with the growth of AWS having free tier, you can go a year off their free tier. And then what's sort of another cool trick is, if you turn your account into an organization, which most organizations do because they have their prod environment and their QA or their dev environment test. If your organization can remain on the one tenant and you don't even have to use anything, and you can keep spinning up new projects as organizations, and you continually roll over the free year. It wouldn't work for a company to do it, mainly because it's just too much work shifting all their infrastructure through things. But for you, just spinning up new servers, new pipelines, just point it to new repositories, you can ride that free tier for a really long time. It's actually pretty it's a fun little trick, which I would only say if it matches up with their EULA and their terms of service. Don't do this as advice if it doesn't, because I've definitely read those things.
Just make a new email, right?
Word. Gulo. Well, here's the other thing is you can use the plus within Gmail. if most people don't know this one, it's a weird one. You can do plus signs after your email address and create new emails. So you can often do that for your root accounts on these other ones because the security of your main account should be just as good if that one pops. Obviously all the environments can be wrecked, but that's how you can spin up those other ones. Gula, what is your home lab looking like these days?
My home lab is, well, a whole bunch of random things because I work on random projects. Currently, I'm doing the Darknet badge, else I would give you a tour of my home lab because most of that's still classified information. But I have things like next to me, I have 5 pounds of sand and aquarium rocks and a transducer that I'm using to see if I can clean carbon from air. I have laser setups for the holograms that I'm designing. I have power supplies that I'm using, um, tons of electronics, breadboards. I've got I have my plants that are dying in the background because I was on vacation for too long. So I'm got really bad smelling mulch in my office that I'm currently cultivating to try to resuscitate some of my plants. Uh, you name it, I pretty much do it. I've got I'm running 7 VMs right now on my main system.
Yeah, this
Um,
this is what's interesting to me is like home lab is such a home lab or your hacking lab is so different depending on what your hobbies are, depending on what your background is. Like for instance, if you look at Joe Grand's right now, I'm guessing he even did an like a here's my office, here's my lab, which is like an oscilloscope, digital logic analyzer. He had all the hardware hacking stuff because he is a hardware hacker at his core, though he knows a lot of other things as well. And I think like for mine, the server rack one cracks me up. So best place if you're looking for an actual server rack, like big blown massive server rack, like not like the little ones you buy off Amazon, like full one. Best place to get them is like Craigslist. Craigslist.
Oh yeah.
I've never done Facebook Marketplace. I'm guessing that would be good too, but you can get them dirt cheap because usually it's companies getting rid of them, rotating them, they're moving, they're getting rid of it, and they just sell whatever. So I found one and it looked really nice. I looked it up, great reviews, solid. I didn't look at the weight of it. And I ask my father, and we go out there with the truck, and we get there, and they had it in the loading bay, and I see it sitting on a forklift. And at this point, I go, oh, this is a terrible idea. And I go over, and this thing is just it's a big, huge metal casters. There was no way two people were moving this thing. Like, absolutely under no circumstances. It was solid metal all the way through, but they're like, $100. I'm like, well,
Are you
of
kidding?
course I'm gonna go for it. It's like this huge, solid thing. Like enough where you like stand like you get like 10 guys just standing on the thing. It was awesome. So we get it in the truck, and then I hire piano movers to move it
Nice.
down into my basement. And now when I
yeah.
eventually sell this house, it's just part of the
Stays there.
construction. Yeah, there's absolutely under no circumstance am I moving this out. But it was awesome. It still is. I still use it today. If you watch the password cracking video, that's where you actually see it in there.
Nice.
But what's great about buying the server racks off of like Craigslist or anything like that is everything's standard on server racks. It was something like I didn't know because I didn't do like network architecture or administration where I had to like always play with them, but everything's standard. So you can get shelving and racks. And if you don't have the mounts for your servers, what I did for all of mine was I just did the shelf units. So if I ever have to swap servers out, where do you rack all your stuff?
So this is a great question. I started without a rack because when you're getting into home labbing, typically you're doing it pretty inexpensively. At least that was my experience. So going to DEF CON, there was like the Unix surplus guy that was always selling whatever machines there. So like Supermicro, some Dells, HPs, whatever else. So I picked up a couple pizza boxes back in the day. And then since I used to work at a cabinet and countertop shop, I just kind of made my own gear to slide these things into. Like, I think my son's first desk was literally a melamine box, but it had a server slide in for the back. It just sounded like an airplane taking off if anytime we turned it on. Well, I've seen other people do the IKEA desk or the IKEA coffee table hack. That's the exact right size to be able to slap it in there. and otherwise you can stack it. When I was at the old place, because I wanted to make sure things were still mobile around the room, I ended up just going down to like what is it? Not Hobby Lobby. There's another one like Harbor Freight, and they got the really cheap furniture dollies. And the cool thing is, those furniture dollies are perfect for slapping servers onto and continuing to build a frame around it, and it just works. So that was the cheap way to go through and do it back in the day. Then I started getting into, okay, I found, similar to you, one that was on sale. Like, I wanted $10 for the damn thing. It used to be an audio equipment one. This thing looks like it's straight out from Fallout, like 76, right? So you got the old army green paint. It's only a half rack width-wise, but for the equipment that I was running, you just put the heavy servers on the bottom, and then all the other ones that I had were the shorter servers. So that worked out fine. Network switches and everything else, just great. So sound equipment and or server racks, if you're looking to try to be able to interchange them, depending on the depth that you're running, you can actually go cheaply by going down that route as well. So
I think something that amazed me before we go to Gulo was when you first like mount a server, there's like the little ears. So you have the big long server, and then there's the little ears, which is what you're like screwing into. It always amazes me how strong those things are, because like ultimately you're holding the server up by the ears. Now I put it on shelf because I still don't trust those things. It always baffles me that you can hold up an entire server with like just 2 screws right there. Like that's expected. And that's a terrible idea. I don't like that at all. Gulo, what were you going to say?
Most servers have rails that you're supposed to attach. There are some short servers that you can screw in like that, but they usually have at least 4 screws and not 2.
Yeah, it's the
you're
power.
Supposed to attach rails to your servers.
Agreed. And I'm not like, I guess I'm not wasn't really. The one I was specifically thinking about was the power one I had, where it was just a giant short battery. It was the UPS I had, and it was 4 screws, but it's still like, you know, like a what felt like a 200-pound server on 4 screws.
Mm-hmm. My server racks were. Yeah. I never actually bought server racks because I've been building server rooms for decades now. I'm super old, but when I decided I needed a home server rack, I'm like, well, this is a good time to practice my welding skills again. So I just went out and bought a whole ton of angle iron. I did all the measurements, and I just welded together whatever it is that I needed. Drilled the holes in it, which takes forever, and just build my own server rack. And every time that I need more space or need a new server rack, I just go to a storage, pull out my MIG welder, and go to town and get things set up so that I can at least practice some of my other skills that I don't get to do all the time.
Oh, it's funny. I just bought shelves. By the way, if I'm using a feature I never use, which is muting myself. If the whole stream is getting muted at randomly, please let me know in chat, or this is going to be awkward in hindsight. I think like when buying the equipment, because you started going through all the equipment that you put up there, where do you buy, when you're getting started off? I know you said you wanted a small Raspberry Pi, because I do think there's something to talk about there. Equipment, where did you buy all of yours? Because my servers, the 2 ones which came to mind is, one, you said you got the pizza box servers, the 1U unit Dells. When I first got those, I got those from, again, off Craigslist, getting them from a company, and I had those for like 2 months before I said, nope, this is terrible, because they sound like an airplane taking off. Like these things are meant to be like move a lot of air, stay cool. So I didn't really think about that in my own server rack. And then later on, I realized I'm like, oh, I'm not really like paying for space. Like typically if you go to a colo or something like that, you pay per U. So oftentimes it behooves you to get 1U units. I think, I don't know if we were just rated, but thank you for whoever that was. I just know the thing going up. So welcome. If you want to join us on Discord and whatnot, we have a Discord link we'll put down below, and we've been hanging out on there. But when those 1U units are meant to push a lot of air, and what we did is, or what I ended up doing is, I found the like 5U or 4U, which ended up just being like desktops turned on their side, and like Dell or IBM or any of a lot of these, like, it was HP or Dell tend to be the ones that you can find really easily on eBay. And I found it's amazing how cheap hardware is on eBay. Like I got two like 1 year old 4U units, which were HP, both with like 192 gigs of memory, like two dual Xeon processors, like massive amounts of power to run any number of VMs. And I think they were each like $1,000 each, which was just it's insane how cheap they are.
So eBay is amazing. Go ahead, Gullo.
There's one thing that I was going to say earlier that I missed. When you're buying a server rack, especially a used server rack, know that there's a difference between server racks and phone racks. If you accidentally buy a phone rack off of eBay or Craigslist or whatever, you're not going to be happy. Make sure it is an actual server rack, because phone racks are a different physical size, different dimensions than server racks.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
That's a great point. Along with this is that somebody else said here, Squiddy said, hey, they suck power as well. So back when I started, I was still living at home with my mom and dad at the time. My first DEF CON, dear God, I was like 17, right? So early days, I come home, I'm so happy I got a server box for $100. I plug in the power. I didn't have to pay for power. I didn't give a shit. Yeah. Well, when it's sitting there idle at 300 watts doing nothing, once you're on your own or having to pay for rent and all that other jazz, you start becoming a lot more aware of how much power you start using when it's just sitting there. So over time, I started off with pizza boxes, went to a couple different ones. We had stuff donated to our hackerspace. We got to play with things. Being able to play with enterprise scale hardware was awesome for helping my career before I was actually doing that professionally. But now the pizza boxes stay in storage because it is so much more efficient for you to grab a new machine, i.e. a Ryzen powered system for how many cores you can get, or getting yourself a small footprint, something that sips power like an Intel NUC, and being able to slap in 64 gigs into that bad boy. You get the tall edition so that you can do an M2 drive, NVMe, and an SSD, and you are sitting well. If you need to scale up, you grab another NUC, slap it on there, and you just created a cluster. And you're able to now continue going forward at like 20 watts underneath full load. So it makes so much more sense.
You bring up a great point, which was you started with server hardware and then moved to what we'll call like consumer hardware, I guess. And this was like such a weird point of confusion when I started. Was I don't know if you had this too, was it was like, oh, I need a server to run like server software. Like if I want to run Ubuntu server, if I want to run Fedora server, Gentoo, whatever it is, if I wanted to run Windows server, I needed to be on server hardware. To start realizing you're like, oh, the main reason why they're server, we'll say, or maybe not main reason. One of the big reasons why a server is because they have like a iDRAC software in them. Yes. They have something where I can be on the other side of the world and reboot them, not losing control. Like they almost have like this subsystem on it, or their ID. I'm blaming the cold because I'm not thinking. Is clearly they have their not hypervisor, but they have this other piece of software which is going to be able to access the monitor and things like that, so you can reboot it. You can mount disks. You can do that. Also, a massive security vulnerability at companies if you don't reset that password or you don't close that down because you just reboot the operating system in safe mode and reset the password. Like, point being, though, is you don't need those things in your home lab because you're sitting 12 feet away from them to be able to just go over, put a disk in, restart it, and you can save yourself a lot of money because you don't really need the iDRAC unless like you have a very specific use case. Did you have that confusion between KVM? Thank you. That's another way. Pretty much some of the systems have like a built-in one. Did you find that weird confusion too, like of server versus hardware? And then I want to move into the next debate because there's the whole argument of, do you do bare bones install? Do you do virtual machines? Do you do containers? Do you do all of that? But did you have this weird like feeling of like I needed server stuff versus that's consumer stuff?
Early on, I would say yes, but then later on, you came to find out, no, you don't need that. So getting into the professional career, you find out that the enterprise stuff is able to help you scale up. When you're in a home lab, the likelihood of you actually supporting an entire enterprise in your home is probably pretty small. unless you're trying to literally test that. And Gulo would be one of those people who would know for sure. So yeah, go ahead, Gulo.
But by the way, thank you for ever just rated us again. We're like have a bunch of viewers. Thank you very much. Feel free to join us. We're here every week, and then we also have a Discord channel down below. And we're in as we have Brandon in the channel, who is a proud sponsor with Garbage VPN. Garbage VPN is doesn't care about your privacy because they sell it to the highest bidder. Gulo.
So server hardware doesn't necessarily, you don't need your iDRAC, you don't need your ILO ports, you don't need any of those. The server hardware is primarily designed by companies to where they are battle tested and burned in. They buy very specific chips when they assemble their servers, and they run through very specific burn-in tests to verify the efficacy of it. While consumer hardware is, we're going to buy whatever's currently on the market, assemble it, sell it to the consumer, and when that chip runs out, we will replace that chip and not tell anyone about it.
True story.
And that's commonplace in the industry. So server hardware, you pay a premium for just for the fact that it should be standardized and that it's burned in, tested, and they verified that everything is compatible. You also run into things like the hardware abstraction layer for like ESXi, where you need to make sure that all of your hardware is on the HAL for ESXi so you can install it and run it. I do scale things at home. It's been a few years since I've had to. Actually, since I've moved, I haven't had to do it, but I ran entire server farms. I've built like company clusters at home for, well, disaster recovery, for lack of better systems. And I know there's the security aspect to it and all those other things, but when you work at startups, you don't have funds to do most things. So you do whatever it is that you can to bring things up, and you pose the risk to the companies, and then the companies can make the decision whether they want that risk. But yeah, I've ran entire server clusters at home. I've set up clustering between databases and all that other stuff. Now I dump all that stuff into a cloud somewhere, if the company can afford a cloud. If not, I'll go to storage and pull out some servers and start spinning things up at home.
So let's ask that. I've gotten asked this question both on chat. MSEC asked it. Thoughts on just running a load of Docker images. I've also heard it from Praxius, who has said, what's the difference between bare metal versus VMs versus Docker? And I think we approach this, we'll say, two ways. One, I think we can discuss it of what are the benefits of some of those, both just from a general security. I don't necessarily want to go into the technology of why, like, of what the difference is. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but bare metal, everything's going to be running on bare metal. On virtual machine, what's going to happen is you have your hypervisor, which is controlling and dictating what resources every VM, but they're still very much segmented. And then Docker is, you're still sharing all the resources, but volumes and things like that are going to be unique and containerized. So I'm not going to go in. There's so much to disclose there. Let's just talk about, like, on home lab. I understand, or building a home lab or hacking lab, this becomes remarkably, I know for me it was frustrating because I felt like, do I run VMs? Do I run bare metal, or do I just run stuff in Docker? What do you do right now, Gator?
Okay, so I'm gonna put on my special hat that I use for work just for half a second, and it's not Docker, it's a container. Just gonna say, when we're talking about containerization,
it's like Kleenex versus tissue.
Exactly.
I get it.
Exactly. All right. So
get on your high horse, though. Go, Rand.
Okay. No, that's as far as I'll go. Because there's a containerization standard, so you want to make sure that whatever you're running is not just locked into a single vendor. So make sure that you're checking that out. I do a little bit of everything, to be honest with you. And depending on your use case, you're going to need to scale one way or another. There are some things, like running Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi is going to give you more features for your hardware because of the plugins that you can install, either like a Raspberry Pi or a NUC or something, or in a VM, because then you're able to pass through USB and do things like your Zigbee pass through and making sure that you're able to talk with things. If you do that in a Docker instance instead, you can't install plugins. So depending on your software, you're going to need to find out what they support on your use case. In some situations, if you just need to run like YouTube Downloader, freaking grab a container, man, and just use that for that purpose. If you're running Kali, grab those individual tools and make sense of what, if you have a dedicated box, fantastic. Use the hardware that you have. If you don't have a bunch of hardware that you can then just spin up and dedicate something to, it makes sense to either go virtualization, so you can spin it up, spin it down when you want and scale it, or use a container. So I use it all.
So also Kali has full containers as well. Gulo, what about you? And
Right.
I'll jump in.
I run most of my stuff's in VMs. I do most of that for security purposes. Red pill and blue pill attacks are very, very rare. And so I'm not too concerned about those. I do use containers. I'm old school. I still use jails. You'll see me spin up a BSD instance and set up jails and build a container in a process the same way that I was doing it, I don't know, 20 years ago.
What are you using for VMs? Like, what software are you using to run your VMs? Do you use ESXi? Do you use Proxmox?
Ooh, here we go.
So it all depends on what I'm doing. So right now I've got VMware Workstation is running most of my VMs on my desktop because I have automated processes with that. My work computer didn't want to spend money on that, so I use VirtualBox on my work computer. I use QEMU for when I need to virtualize my hardware. So I have a virtualized version of Windows running on my home computer so that I can have direct access to my video card so I can do my VR engineering tasks. So I use most of them. There's a handful, like I don't use like Proxmox. I don't use Parallels because I'm not a Mac person, but I use most. Hyper-V, I hate Hyper-V. If we're sponsored by Microsoft, I quit.
Hyper-V is free. I did use it for a little bit. I'm trying to find the comment in chat because someone said I moved over to Docker and then I never went back, and I'm trying to scroll up and see it. So whoever that was, I'm with you on that. So go on, Gator, and then I'll.
It has to go with the monolithic applications. Not everything can move to a container yet, and part of the hat that I wear on a daily basis is also talking about companies large scale to where, hey, everything should go containerization. Not everything can.
Yeah.
If somebody is unwilling to move their monolithic container program and they have to dedicate an entire VM to it because it's so complicated and they can't repeat the damn thing because they're not thinking CI/CD, they are not ready to go to containerization. For our use cases in our home labs, you probably can. But to your point on different hypervisors, I've tried most of them. Starting off with, I used VirtualBox because it was free, didn't cost me anything, and it ran on literally every host operating system, which was great. Until I got into the second year professionally doing Linux work sysadmin, I had a comparison to where my developers were running into a problem to where every single feature or every single release of VirtualBox took away a needed feature and then brought it back and then made it super buggy. And we did a comparison between that and VMware Workstation, and VMware Workstation just worked consistently to where we could import and export the box. And I am not a VMware fanboy. I want to make sure I'm using the right tool for the job. And in this case, if you want something stable and you have money, go get VMware or use the player side. Otherwise, VirtualBox, if you have time that you want to tinker and learn the technology, is great, but there may be features that they drop or change or have buggy over time. So anyway, I'm also going to drop a link to Da667's book on, he calls it the Avatar 2, but it is a home labbing setup. And the awesome part about this is that he takes like every major hypervisor and tells you how to set up a security lab for yourself every single way, which is just awesome. It's a free book too.
Yeah. Brandon, story time on this one. Yes, I was confused as well. And there was like 2 streams ago, that shirt is actually backwards. It's actually backwards, and it drives me nuts because on stream. So every scene on this entire channel, so like when I'm flipping between people like this and here and all of these are all controlled independently. Use a great software called Ecamm. It works fantastic. I would totally, if anyone's interested in me talking about this software and how I do it, let me know. I'm happy to talk through it because it's actually really cool. One of the things that lets me control is flipping his camera and mirroring it. So on stream, while he's wearing this stupid shirt, I started flipping his camera live on every scene. Like 10 minutes, you see my head go down, and I'm flipping it because I thought somehow he flipped his camera to find out, no, that's just the shirt. It's just the shirt, and and the story goes, and I'll let him say it, but effectively I flipped it all to find him. He makes a reference to the shirt. He's like, oh yeah, it's backwards. Oh, weird. It's forwards. And then I had to spend the next 10 minutes, like 20 minutes on stream flipping the stupid thing back and forth. Gator, why is it backwards? Because I'm sure everyone's now curious.
So this is made from a shirt from the Black Hills InfoSec folks, which give great trainings away. They are really helping the open source community, and they give stuff away, which is awesome. The shirt is for you to be able to look in the mirror and see the hacker that you want to see, and see the hacker that you want to grow into. So it's a whole mirror thing in self-image. So it's Raykar, and yeah, walking around town or on a stream, it's kind of funny because some people get it, and then some people are like, huh?
Yeah,
Great.
It was just like, especially you, where it's like DEF CON is forward and then that's backwards. So yes, it's Gator. It's everyone on
Trolling.
the stream slowly trolling me, seeing my brain melt on stream. Let's spin it back though to running on VMs. I think one of the hardest things when you come to building your system, do I want to do bare metal? Do I want to run a hypervisor? I think it all comes down to like what your purpose is, and I actually do both. I have an ESXi cluster, which I run. I chose that because I didn't want to lose any hardware to an underlying operating system to run virtualization on top. So I used ESXi. At one point, I had full vCenter and things like that because I wanted to learn it. And then on the other side of things, I have my container server, which is legitimately Ubuntu server running Docker, and all my containers are on there. The main reason is because there are times which I want I want control of the hardware. For me, it's when I have things that are hardware specific, I need those in VMs. I know, yes, you can mount those. You can do some cool things within Docker. I don't want to. It's easier if I want to do like wireless or anything like that. I can just have a VM. It also lets me do really weird routing when I want to do like a virtual spanning port, or I want to have all this traffic flow through. It lets me reroute my networking very, very quickly. Yes, you can do it in Docker, a lot easier in VMs. That's what I run all my, we'll just say like all those systems that are reliant on hardware. But I find myself more and more moving completely away from those, because I'm finding myself less and less need those hardware requirements, especially the testing I'm doing, and moving way more towards Docker. Like especially you can do some really awesome things within Docker when it comes to like CI/CD, spinning up little tiny services, and you can run the entire thing with a Docker Compose. So what I'm doing right now, and it feels a lot like over engineering, but isn't that the fun of having a hacking lab at home or a home lab? Is I have my Docker Compose on GitHub, and what I do is anytime I push a change over to it, it automatically, my system is monitoring that. It does a webhook on over and then rebuilds all the Docker containers off of that Docker Compose. So I can push changes, and what's really nice is all the storage, because I do need storage on those VMs, or on those containers, and I have those mounted over to a Synology box. So yes. What's great is if that server gets blown away, if the house goes on fire, whatever it is, my entire configuration is there. And then Synology has a great feature which lets me back up all that data over to S3 and then Glacier, which is like really cheap storage for like long-term storage. A little bit of a pain in the butt to get out, but containers are just so nice. You can do a lot with them. You can run them up. And what I've been teaching within like our juniors for work is running all their security tools within Docker containers, because they can spin up, they can run it, but it teaches more programmatic thinking when it comes to, I want to spin this container up, I want to run the tool, I want to grab those results, and I want to store them off to here. And you can be more programmatic in your thinking. So I want to do a test SSL. I want to run Nmap. I want to do all of this. And the nice thing is, not only is Nmap now containered off your system, you don't, especially when it comes to like hacking security tools, you don't have to get in dependency hell. Like a perfect example of this. Every SSL tool requires an outdated old version of OpenSSL. If you run it locally on your system, or in a VM for that matter, you're going to, like, on Kali. Now, Kali has some really cool configuration built into it specifically for this tool. But if you, like, install it on Ubuntu or something like that, you effectively hose every other tool on your system because you have to install an outdated version of OpenSSL, which breaks compatibility with new versions. Within Docker, now it all just works because all the old dependencies are there. All the configuration is there. It spins up, it runs, it gets the information, it stores it off, and then kills itself. And then you can do whatever you want. You can have another container spin up. So you start thinking through problems a little differently, I feel, when it comes to containers. And also, anyone who wants to argue this, that is absolutely where the industry is going. Like, it is going towards Dockerizing everything. Or, containerizing. I'll take a drink.
So I disagree with some of that. I use bare metal for a lot of things because I still moonlight as a reverse engineer of malware, a REM. And a lot of malwares that I play with, most of the malware that exists out there now identifies when it's running in a VM or when it's running in a sandbox, like a container. So then it's harder for me to actually find, like, the phenotype, what it's actually doing to the operating system, because it changes how it runs based on it not being on bare metal. As far as containerization goes, this is a fad just like everything else in the industry. We've done containers before. We've done virtual machines. We've done dumb terminals. We've done processing at the desktop, and we just cycle through it about every 10 or so years. This is something that's going to happen, and then it's going to go away again. And then it's going to happen, and it's going to go away again. And I think I just killed Silk.
To that point is
I'm allergic to your crap. So
Mainframe
Gator, what do
man.
you say? Because I'm going to disagree in a moment here.
So mainframe versus thin clients, man. It all comes right back around to it, to where not everything can go to a container. Yes, that's where a lot of the industry is shifting. Is everybody shifting? No. I cannot tell you professionally how many places refuse to come over to containerization because they don't have the time or money to pay talented developers to re-architect their entire software stack that they've been running for years. Should they? Yes. Will they? Eventually. But right now, the answer is no.
Look at the banking systems are still running mainframes that are 30 and 40 years old.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but no, hold on. You're going like this, and you're saying it's on the nose. I'm going to say BS, because due to so much regulation, it's cheaper for them just to continue those things running than to upgrade them. Because the moment they upgrade them, the moment they touch them, it triggers regulatory compliance, and they're going to have to re-up any security testing they've done. It's just a huge expense when there's no reason for them to update them. There's no purpose for them to update them. Also, with them being air-gapped and things like that. Like, you look at some of, like, the hedge fund. Oh, what would be? I'm skirting the line on this one. For hedge fund spaces, those are air-gapped. However, as they require more and more connection into the internet, like for algorithmic trading, which is driven through, we'll call it machine learning AI, ultimately like scanning social media and things like that. A lot of those ones, the way they work them back into the algorithm is not by modifying the old systems. It has been within either a VM or Docker, which they open up an API, which then drops files into a single server. So, like, there is multiple air gaps, but it is round peg and square hole just to be able to justify not touching those systems. I am responding, though, before either of you cut me off. I complete call BS on Gulo. I don't think it's flavor of the month. I think it's people are just overexcited about it, and they're like, oh my gosh, we can Dockerize and contain. Gosh, I'm sorry. Now it's now in my head. We can containerize. Containerize. Take a drink. We can containerize everything, and it's going to solve all of our problems. And everyone's moving towards it without really going, wait, what is What is the purpose of this? What is the real need what is the problem that this is solving? And where I think it's solving, and nothing else has been able to do this for, is CI/CD. Within test cases, within unit testing, within security testing, within a CI/CD pipeline, nothing has really solved it as cleanly as this has. You look at like build tasks and things like that. When I push code, I can grab it, it can build it, it can push it, and then it drops it. I think for like ongoing hosting services, there's going to be another layer of abstraction, which will be like a sub container. And I think this is where like Kubernetes and whatnot is actually solving some of like where Docker Swarm and that whole fight happened. And I won't pull off, like, I'll let it scab, Gator. I'll let it scab. But where I think like that's it's not just a new fad. I think that is the solution for CI/CD, and I think ongoing security testing. I think Docker containerization solves. I've been living and breathing it. It solves ongoing security testing within development. Containerization solves that, because security tools honestly are a remarkable pain in the butt, because a lot of them are open source, which I'm glad. That's not why they're pain in the butt, but they're pain in the butt because they require dependency hell. And it's so bad, we've come up with like new and creative ways to describe what dependencies you have to install. So I'll stop there. Gulo, I'll let you defend yourself.
My defense is we've done this as an industry. This is not the first time we've done containerization. This is not the first time we've done sandboxing of applications. This is not the first time that we've integrated those into CI/CD pipelines. This is all technology that we've been doing for 20 years. I'm not saying it's a fad. I'm saying it's a wave. And the wave is going to ebb, and we're going to move into something else, which is going to go back probably even farther or move more into the future. We continually cycle between thin clients, desktop clients, containers, not containers. We bounce all over the place. I can't use containers for everything because I need bare metal access, because I'm doing virtualization. I'm building holograms. I need to have something that does not have latency, which means that I have to build systems that are more hardware dependent than software dependent. I also design global clouds as well.
Squiddy brought up a point, and I love him dearly because, or her, or them, whomever. I realize I just caught myself on that. Yeah, we're into containerization. I'm sorry. Home Lab. This stream is a professional stream, which we stay on topic every time. At one point, I'm gonna just make the title of the stream like talking about stuff. That's
rant.
Thank you for that.
We have a topic?
Yeah, that's about it. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that. Well, let's get back on topic though, which is okay. How would you go? Look,
Silk is wrong. It's okay. Everybody's opinion. Everybody can have their own opinion. Everybody's got their own opinion, just like everybody's got their own butt, right?
Yeah, and fine. This is one of my favorite quotes for this was this is what's great about opinions. We can have differing opinions. I can shove mine up. You can take yours and you can shove yours up your own butt. And I can shove mine up my own butt. And we can both walk away bow-legged from this conversation.
Absolutely.
Quote. So, Home
smiling.
What was that? Did you say with a smile?
With a smile, yes.
With a smile. Oh, goodness. This is a professional stream.
I got this.
Again, this is what I love it. Home Lab. What would you do if you wanted to set up something now? Because I think everyone gravitates towards Raspberry Pi. You need a Raspberry Pi. I have a Raspberry Pi. I use it for like one container because overall I think it's crap and I know everyone loves them and they're like, you can cluster them. I think they're a terrible piece of hardware for like how much they are for what they host. And I know Gator just died inside.
No. So here's the reality. I have 50 Raspberry Pis. I've been a fan of these because they've been cheap coming in. It's great to be able to get into it very inexpensively and introduce children or other people who are interested in technology at a very cheap rate to Linux, right? most of the time, you're not going to be allowed to reinstall the operating system on your machine. If you hand somebody a Raspberry Pi, go nuts. It's not going to be a big deal. They were trying to get hardware back in people's hands. The early days were very early days, and they were rough. I love Raspberry Pis, but I know they have a limitation. The awesome part about the newest iteration is with Raspberry Pi 4s, you can use it as a desktop finally now. The 8 GB ones exactly are absolutely nuts. They have 1, 2, 4, and 8 GB versions now of RAM, which are fantastic. With the newest Raspberry Pi 4, you don't have to run on the micro SD card anymore. You can literally run off of an SSD or an NVMe drive with an additional hat. So coming to low power stuff, the ability for you to do things now with the Raspberry Pis, in my opinion, is worth it. Earlier days, unless it was just for you to learn and to tinker, it wasn't ready to go to production. They had changed that over time to where they started saying, hey, if you buy this Raspberry Pi 3 and above or such, we're going to give you 10-year support. And then they started doing other things like, just as much of a nerd as I am here, when it comes to the Raspberry Pis, they started putting the shields on top of the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to where you could include it in a professional product. And then you, as whoever you're including this with your package deal of the new whiz bang thing that you're pushing out to the public, you as the company don't have to get certified because Raspberry Pi did the work, making sure that the radio frequencies were shielded the proper way and blah, blah, blah. So the new Raspberry Pis are absolutely worth it. They can get a little bit hard to find right now because just like everything else, you've got issues of finding the source. But if you end up checking out something called RPi Locator, I'm going to drop a link here in chat. I have had fantastic luck. These guys are going through and checking to make sure the companies are okay with it, checking the sites to make sure that they're updated, and then posts on Twitter and on their site via an RSS feed for you to get up and running. With the new Raspberry Pis, you have full gigabit, you have USB 3, but if you're talking about trying to get started, if you have $100, buy a Raspberry Pi kit and you're up and running. If you want to, and the big issue is though, is that this is just running ARM. If you don't know if your software is going to run on ARM architecture, this may not be for you. That's where, in my opinion, either getting yourself a laptop or going to the NUC side of the house. A NUC versus you building yourself a less than $1,000 tower, depending on if you need more cores or more RAM, or if you need the smaller footprint and smaller power sipping, that's going to be your balance. Because you can build a rig for less than $1,000 and have a fantastic VM machine. Or if you want something very small, very compact, and that just sips power, get yourself an Intel NUC, but know that you're going to have a limitation on how many cores you're going to have.
This is kind of... Go on, Gulo.
Raspberry Pis, I don't have 50.
I have 50.
I have 50.
It's not a problem. It's a collection.
I might have 50. The way that you guys...
Everyone's wondering, why are they sold out everywhere? Why are they sold out of it? Gulo, why are they sold out everywhere?
Because Gator's evil.
No!
So the Raspberry Pis... I don't use them as computers. I don't use them as operating systems. I have laptops. I have computers. I've never used a Raspberry Pi for those purposes. I use a Raspberry Pi, and I recommend Raspberry Pis because they have GPIO pins that are accessible from the operating system. You have a couple of different options when you start playing with electronics and design. I can go buy an ESP32, and I can go learn how to code in C on the ESP32 and install libraries and basically try to kill myself because I don't understand anything about any hardware, anything, or programming to a level where I can get it to do what I want it to do. You can then go up to an Arduino. An Arduino runs a lighter version of C, if you will, and you can go through, and there's lots of tutorials and you can walk through it. But debugging how an Arduino runs and works can be very, very difficult to do, and you have similar capabilities. But then you have a Raspberry Pi where you have an entire operating system. You have tools that you can install on there to debug and actually print error messages out onto a screen that you can read rather than just blinking an LED, a red LED that means error. So the Raspberry Pi gives you the ability to start playing with hardware at an operating system level, coding in Python, coding in Root, coding in whatever it is that you want to code in, and control physical hardware with it. That's why I use Pies, and I have tons of them in my home because I control freaking air. I have auto waterers. I control my light. I don't control my lights. A machine learning algorithm that tracks the sun controls
Oh my
my
goodness.
lights.
Ridiculous.
Home
I
assistant
cannot
for the
turn
win.
them off and
I'm
on by
appalled.
myself.
It's interesting though, because we went down this path of Raspberry Pi and what they're good for and things like that, and it's more and more demonstrates that your home lab is really going to be built around what you're trying to accomplish. But I think there are a few things that are almost necessity as your first setup. Like I think there's lab setup, and I'm going to set up Raspberry Pis and things like that, but it's mentioned multiple times in chat of setting up VLANs and segmenting your network and things like that. So I think at this point I do want to pull it back. What's up, Gulo? Oh goodness.
VLANs are not security barriers.
So I think VLANs are not security barriers. That being said, I think we do need to like segmenting networks. I want to talk a little bit about what our home labs are and probably where they've evolved to. Just in the last little bit of stream here, and I'll start because I think when I started, I had like pfSense. Well, I don't think did they end up open sourcing the community version? I think they went back and forth, and I'm not sure if they ever actually open sourced the community version. Point being is, I think that's where I started. You start with pfSense, and I think it's spinning up your first firewall. One of the things I encourage anyone to do in the security industry is don't use your ISP's stupid router that they come. If you can avoid it, awesome. But if you are forced to use it, where oftentimes you are, kick off Wi-Fi and just treat it as a piece of a malicious network and then put yours in front of that. So have your firewall and everything like that. Spectrum still hasn't fixed their, common password for all of them to SSH into, which is terrifying to me. But then, I think it's like pfSense. But I moved off of pfSense and I went to Ubiquity, which is closed source and things like that. What I really love is I can run my entire controller in Docker. This time I'm allowed to use Docker or any container, but this time it's Docker Gator. I'm going to call it Docker. It's going to be a thing. But I moved over to Ubiquity, and I think this is such a common thing when we've talked through it. So many people have moved over to Ubiquity for their home network. Gator, isn't that what you did?
Oh, yes. So coming from
nice.
The point that I did not go through and do my Network Plus, the gap that I learned from doing my home stuff, trying to use so pfSense was something I got myself up to. I ended up using OpenWRT, flashing routers, doing that for a long time because of the Hack5 Pineapple. I was very much into that from the early scenes. Being able to learn how to properly set up a firewall was something that you learned over time, but the ability for you to actually see what's going on in your network, I've not found another solution that's as good at this point as Unify. And yes, you're right. It is closed source. It's not open source. But because of the insights that you're able to get and you're able to self-host versus it going out to somebody's stupid cloud and then you're grabbing the information, I love the Ubiquity gear. They've had some trip-ups as a company in the last couple of years, including them suing certain security researchers right now too, but we're not going to get into that. Their hardware is solid. So for me starting off, Raspberry Pi with the unified network controller, I think you're going to talk about it went from Ubiquity to pfSense. I started the same way. They had a nice edge router, and then I upgraded later on. So I'll hand it off to whomever.
Yeah, actually, we got a question in here. We got it. This is a long question. Ultimately, it came down to if you're setting up a cluster, how can you make it as close to production? This question is a really hard one to answer because what does production environment mean? For some software, you can run it on light sail, and that's production, one system. If you're looking for a cluster, well, then there's all sorts of all the fun stuff which exists within, a full Kubernetes cluster with failover and failover and failover. Production is kind of squishy. I would say if you're looking for a cluster, this is where I think Raspberry Pis do come in because it lets you do some of this advanced configuration, which might be a little expensive to set up, or you get one system with VMs, run ESXi, and then build out your cluster and learn it that way. What's up, Gulo?
Clusters, This is what I do. This is one of my day jobs. Is I build massive global networking clusters of everything. Clustering depends on your application. I don't care if you're running containerization and you have Kubernetes managing the cluster. If your application does not support it, then you're going to run into issues. You can set up all the application level clustering you want. If your hardware doesn't support it, then you're going to run into issues. There's multiple levels. So when you talk about a cluster, you have to define what it is that you're actually trying to cluster and what technologies that you're using. So yes, you can totally build a cluster at home. You can sync things at home, but you have to pay attention to things like cap theorem. What is the data? What do I care about the cluster? Does everything need to be identical across everything? Am I using the cluster for failover, or do I care about speed? You have to pay attention because you can only choose 2 out of the 3 from the actual cap theorem when you're running it.
Okay. We're looking for someone. Me and Gator will start going back and forth in chat because we're looking for someone to raid on Twitch as we come to the end of this. So if you have any recommendations, please throw them in chat because I'd love to see them. I think when we move towards inside the network, we've talked about how to protect your network, what you're running. There's lots of different. There's Unbound and other things. I think the next phase is DNS. I think for me that is the biggest thing to kind of like up your game for your home network. And then now we're moving from we'll say your hacking lab or home lab all the way to like kind of your home network is kind of regain some of that control, which I think we do a whole stream on. But I think the big one is getting a hold of your own DNS, whether it's with Pi-hole, whether it's with Unbound, whether it's with legitimately anything else, doing a shadow NAT or something like that to capture anything reaching out over 53 and redirecting it, I think is huge within your network. I moved from doing some weird, complicated, like Pi-hole to bind, from bind, then running that through another connection, because all this was to accomplish was to make it so I could do the DNS over to HTTPS, which is what Cloudflare supported. I moved this at what now just like Pi-hole just runs it. I like Pi-hole. I don't run Pi-hole on a Raspberry Pi. I run it in a Docker image, and then I use Cloudflare D to host the Cloudflare portion of it. I noticed there's a few other ones in chat. Gator, what are you using?
Okay, so I am using pfSense as my firewall router, and I'm going through and pointing to Quad 9 and then Cloudflare as the backup. Because when we're talking about security, you're also looking at whenever you're going and Googling something or you're just searching a term, that's going to your ISP. We can talk about DNSSEC, and if you're going to go through and turn that on for your entire network and where your privacy paranoia level is. So that's where I'm at currently. So yeah, and there's different hardware. Thing is that if you need to be able to start looking to see what's inside of your network, so that's where I suggest if you're just getting started, go get yourself a Pi-hole. If you have a Raspberry Pi lying around, plugging that into your network is not hard for you to start see the insight of what's going on with your network, how much ads are being served to you, and things reaching out. Doesn't cost you that much to get started. Once you start getting into more of the
too. It's like 40%. It's like 40% of my network traffic is just
crazy
ads. As a quick tip here, which I completely messed up on for a long time and now have since fixed. If you're running Pi-hole as your like local DNS as well, which you just do all the manual entries, which is great. If you have that on your ESXi system and that goes down, it is remarkably hard to get to your vCenter because your DNS server is down, and it's kind of this really bad chicken and the egg problem because you can't get to vCenter because you don't have DNS, and you can't spin up that system until your DNS is online. And this is where Raspberry Pi is now fit into my network, that is my failover DNS server. So I have 2 Pi-holes, and I use syncing across them for configuration, this is where Docker is great, because I have one configuration which gets back synced between the 2 of them, so if the main one goes down, this one can take over. Gula, what are you using for DNS?
I have a Pi-hole and I hate it.
Yeah.
It's So I loved it. It's been working really great. And last week I was trying to do some stigs, and I was trying to pull down the stigs from
See
a
you later,
government
Squiddy.
website, and the certificate keeps failing on that website. And I tracked it down to my Pi-hole DNS. I don't know why my Pi-hole will not resolve that domain name, and I've been troubleshooting it off and on for about a week now. I know bind, I know unbound, I know how the Pi-hole works. I still have not figured out why my Pi-hole is not forwarding DNS requests to the proper server in the cloud, and I'm running like TCP dump on it. I'm in an entire, well, Pi-hole at this point, trying to hunt down what it's doing so that I can fix it, because I don't know. And it's driving me absolutely crazy. I'm about ready to throw the thing away and just build my own DNS again, because stupid Pi-hole.
Pi-hole did get really frustrating for me for a long time, because there's oftentimes I want to click on ads, and I don't know if there's a solution to this. Is like the top result of Google, or you go, okay, cool, that one's the quickest. So I've trained now like to drop down, but the worst one is like every once in a while, like I've unsubscribed from so much crap online in my inbox, but every once in a while I actually want to click on a link in my inbox, and I click on it, and then bam, it goes into the DNS hole. It goes into the Pi-hole and then just stops it. So now I have to go in, temporarily disable it, or I need to now enable that individual tracker for the email. And I want to fix it. And here's the thing is, I have an idea, and I saw someone online who has used either like Siri or one of those to actually do an if then else to disable it. But again, I set up my massive button on stream. Oh goodness, if I can get my wire to. Oh, is it muted?
Oh,
Hold on. Oh, that's so. I think it's because I had to rewrite all the themes for this. Let me see if I can get it over here. No, I have to move it over to another one. I haven't actually done the hotkey for it. Oh, that's so sad. It's right here.
there it is.
But actually get it so the button actually will temporarily disable it for like 5 seconds, and it seems like an easy thing to do. So maybe I'll make a video on that one. Have the button where it's just like it's my panic button, just to hit the button so I can actually click it. I think we're getting to the point though. Like, we've covered a lot. My gosh, there's so much to talk about this topic.
So much more.
my voice is so gone. Getting over the cold, but I missed you all. Thank you for joining us. I really do sincerely appreciate it. But the last word, Gator, what do you got for us?
So don't be afraid to jump in and home lab. You're going to learn a lot, even if you mess up, because you're going to mess up, and you're going to find out what works for you and your environment. It's a constantly evolving thing, and don't be afraid just to jump in. It doesn't cost you a lot of money for you to start tweaking and learning. So if you guys want to be able to find out what we're doing in our home labs, either hit us up in the Discord, you can hit us up on Twitter as well, and share your experiences thus far, because what software works for some people may not work perfectly for other folks, and that's why we're here. We're trying to share our knowledge. And with that, make sure to go love your hacker family.
Gula, what do you got for us?
The opinion that is up my butt is containers are a wave and Silk is wrong.
As always, thank you for bearing with me as I was muting out, coughing up a lung. Thank you for joining us. I really do think with so much of home labbing, it's like fail often, fail better, continue to improve, and as always, hack on.